webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website, autism.org.
Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speaker. Amanda Tammy is a board-certified behavior analyst and licensed professional counselor. She has experience working with both children and adults, including those who have autism spectrum disorder and other pervasive developmental disorders, ADD, ADHD, anxiety issues, and trauma, both as a BCBA and as a counselor. She has additional specialized training as a counselor in EMDR therapy and its applications to children. You can type your questions into the questions section starting now and throughout the talk. She will answer as many as she can at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Denise. Can you still hear me? Okay, great. Thanks everyone for being here today. We've got more information on coping with transitions during the pandemic. I'm sure everyone is at a stage where they're looking ahead and maybe seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, wondering what's next. So I hope that some of the information I can provide today will be helpful for your families, for your loved ones with autism, and as you navigate this next phase of whatever comes next. I want to first take a minute to just acknowledge that we have all, and still are, living through a collective trauma. All of us together. This past year of the pandemic has been a trauma. Probably even more so if you've experienced job loss of loved ones. But there is lots of loss that has come over the past year. And even if you haven't lost jobs or loved ones or the big things in your lives, we have all gone through a very significant change in our day-to-day lives, in life in general. So trauma is an emotional response to a life-changing event or a series of adverse events that changes the way we perceive and experience the world. Trauma is ubiquitous to human experience, meaning everyone experiences trauma. It's something that just is part of being human. But as someone in the mental health field, I have seen so much more anxiety, depression, hopelessness, need for crisis intervention over this past year. And it seems like everyone is exhausted. Everyone is burnt out. It's been a life-changing year. And for so many people, has been a life-changing in a way that has included a lot of hardships, and if nothing else, requiring a lot more mental energy. We're grieving the loss of non-homebound leisure activities. We're grieving physical touch and social connection. We're grieving loss of life as we knew it and loss of loved ones, loss of time. So remember that and allow yourself time and space to grieve. At the same time, we have also experienced a behavioral cusp, or a series of behavioral cusps over the past year. In applied behavior analysis, a behavioral cusp is a behavior change that, once learned, provides opportunities for new contingencies, new opportunities for reinforcements, access to new environments. A classic example of a behavioral cusp is learning how to read. Once you learn how to read, you have access to a wide range of other sources of reinforcement that if you were not able to read, you would not have access to. And over the past year, we've learned lots of new ways of doing things. And some things are never going back to the way they were. Maybe some of us will continue to work remotely after COVID. Maybe masks are the new norm. They've decreased the number of colds and flu cases in addition to COVID exposure. Maybe restaurants will continue to offer more takeout and outdoor dining options. I know I am hoping never to have to go grocery shopping in a grocery store again. I'm loving online orders. So what will life be like in 6 months? Probably not what it is today, not what it has been over the past year, but also probably not what it was pre-COVID. Author Shay Wesley Martin posted on social media, I think what many of us are feeling or thinking now that I'm fully vaccinated. I just want you to know that I still won't be able to make that thing because I don't want to come. COVID has really been a nice excuse in some ways to get out of those uncomfortable social gatherings or those things that we didn't want to do in the first place. So with vaccines coming into play, more places opening, options for school changing, and the world as we know it shifting yet again, today we're going to talk about some strategies to help our loved ones with autism with the adjustments and the transitions. So I'm planning to talk about upcoming changes and how to help someone prepare. I'm going to talk specifically about social anxiety and the effects of the pandemic on social anxiety. And then we'll go quickly over some strategies for coping and helping with anxiety or helping with big emotions. So let's get started with those changes and preparing. We've had a year of practicing accommodating the ever-changing new normals, and we're entering a new phase of the new normal. Decisions, changes, timing, these are all going to vary depending on your location, your school district, your family and household needs. So our exact new normal won't be the same for any two groups or any two families. Some things that we might expect might change or go back to how they used to be, or in some form or fashion back to how they used to be, might be school. A lot of schools are now reopening. Mask requirements are changing. Here in Texas, the statewide mask mandate has been lifted, but the city of Austin still is requiring masks. So depending where you are, lots of things are changing. More public places are reopening. We're able to see family and friends more than maybe we could a year ago, or at least some people are. Travel seems like it could be possible this summer. And all these things are going to happen at a different pace depending on where you are, who you're around, the level of exposure, and the decisions about and access to vaccines on top of individual family risks and values. So it's important that we help our kids prepare for and understand the potential and potentially inequitable or seemingly inequitable changes. You might find yourself questioning the decisions that you've made over the past year or regretting how you've handled various situations. I mentioned a few minutes ago the grief of the loss of time. And for a parent of someone with autism, you might be regretting the loss of time that your child had for ABA or recreational or other therapeutic activities or skill building. Give yourself a break. We've all been doing the very best that we can and making the decisions that work for us right now. And that's okay. There will be time for catch up or reteaching later. And everything that you've done and every decision that you've made over the past year was enough then and is still enough today. You need to make the decision that's right for right now to even be able to make it to the future. So let's practice radical acceptance, where we acknowledge that this is the reality of where we are right now. We can't change that, but we can make decisions about what comes next based on that reality. We need to make goals for our future based on the reality of what life is right now and of what options are out there right now and what skills we have right now. Okay, so in preparing for potential changes and potential new normals, continue to talk about things tentatively. There's still so much that's unknown. There are still so many variables in play that what's the reality right now might not be in the future, might not be in 1 month or 6 months from now. So for now, with the information we have now, this is the plan. And we hope that in 1 month, we'll be able to do these other things and we will be ready to wait longer if it isn't safe. Talk about things in tentative language, but whenever possible, give more concrete details like the exact dates or exactly what you'll be looking for to make changes. So for example, like once grandma and grandpa get the vaccine, we can visit with them again. That's the concrete criteria that is going to determine our behavior. When the weather is warmer and we can spend more time outside, we can invite friends over for a play date. Or maybe it's when the city changes their risk guidelines, that's when we know that it's safe to go into Target again. So the concrete criteria that we're looking for is this. If you haven't thought about this yet, if you haven't thought about how you'll make these decisions or what criteria you're going to be looking for, maybe now is the time to do that. There are, of course, still a lot of things that are uncertain and a lot of things that might change again in the future, but setting your criteria is a way to make things more concrete, even when we don't know exactly how or when things will change. Maybe it's just as simple as waiting for guidance from public health officials. That works. That's your criteria. And that's something concrete that you can look at and share with your loved ones. One of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing in the people who I provide services to is difficulty in accepting and understanding all the differences in what's allowed from state to state, school to school, and probably especially family to family. It's really hard, especially for kids with black and white thinking patterns. I have one person who I see who believes that his extended family, like his grandparents and aunts and uncles, must hate him and his nuclear family because the extended family is still unwilling to do in-person visits, while his nuclear family has begun to kind of let their guard down more and see people from outside their household. So I'm going to go over like a kind of concrete idea framework to help kids with explaining this and making these differences less distressing. However, as parents, make sure that you're validating how unfair these things can feel. This is a kid's or even an adult's real experience. It really feels unfair. And simply feeling heard, making sure that they know that you get it, does a lot to decrease the distress. Also keep in mind that if someone is repeating questions or statements over and over, and it seems like no answer or no response from you brings them any satisfaction, if this might be an indication of anxiety or distress. They might not be saying this thing over and over or asking the question repeatedly to seek information, but rather it's their way of telling us that it's present on their mind and it's causing distress. So respond as if they're saying, I'm scared. I have been talking to my son about things in terms of need to and want to. Things that we need to have or do to keep us safe and alive and have money to buy the things that we need to stay alive versus want tos, the things that we like to do or like to have, but maybe aren't needed for our survival or for our safety. So need tos would be things like going to work or going to school, wearing a mask in public places, going to buy food or going to the doctor's office or taking care of family or neighbors or other people who are in need of our support. Whereas want tos might be things like taking off my mask or eating in a restaurant or going to a friend's birthday party or going to a movie theater. And this concept of need to and want to will come into play for this kind of framework that we're going to talk about, of using a risk thermometer to talk about what's safe and what's not, which will be different for every person. So depending on your loved one's level of understanding, you can modify or simplify this as needed. So I explain that each person has a maximum level of risk that we can expose ourselves to each week. And we talk about all the risk factors. So for example, if someone works if someone works in a grocery store, and so they're around a lot of people all the time, and this person also has pulmonary problems, so they're already really high risk should they encounter COVID. They need to be really careful to avoid other risks because their whole risk allotment is consumed by going to work. Going to a movie theater or going out to eat would maybe be too risky. But for someone with no immunocompromising conditions who is working fully remotely, their everyday risk level is much lower. So they maybe do have room for more of those social activities or spending time away from the home. More of the want tos, the things that they want to do. If our whole risk allotment is consumed with need tos, we don't have risk room for want tos. But if we don't have a lot of need tos that are really risky or potentially leading to exposure, then we have more room for the want tos. So we talk about it in terms of what are the need tos, what are the want tos, and how much room do we have for want tos, given how much exposure we can have. For someone who understands more concrete numbers, I might use a 1 to 5 scale or a 1 to 10 scale and have a different discussion about where each need to or want to activity would fall on the scale, and talk about what number that is. And then we can talk about how to make that activity safer or decrease their risk in other areas so that they have more room for more want tos, so that their risk is not completely taken up by other things. And finally, for someone with less cognitive understanding abilities, I might just use the risk thermometer to talk about one activity at a time and decide where on the risk thermometer that activity would fall without looking at the larger context. So going to an indoor birthday party, if this person is unwilling to wear a mask, is very high risk. But going to an outdoor play date with just one friend, even without a mask, is a little bit lower. So we have the opportunities to, excuse me, we have opportunities to make more decisions and have more options about what to do and where to do them, deciding what's safe and what's not, given our new opportunities, given the new information that we have, or whether or not someone has gotten a vaccine, or whether or not they're willing to wear a mask. The risk thermometer is a good way to help kids get involved in and understand those decisions that their parents make. So if we take the example of that person, my client who I mentioned earlier, who was really hurt by not being able to see his extended family. He thought the extended family hates him. We used the risk thermometer to help him understand that his family's risk, the nuclear family's risk, was much lower than his grandmother's risk. And while he still was really hurt and saddened by the fact that he wasn't getting to see her, he was not blaming himself anymore or believing that the extended family hates him. Didn't take away the pain and the hurt that he felt, but he was able to understand it in a more concrete way and attribute meaning in a way that didn't blame himself. Can I have a birthday party this year? Well, let's think about what the risk factors are. Do we need to care for anyone who's immunocompromised? How can we have a birthday party in a way that decreases the risk? Summer camp, again, what are the factors in the larger context? Is anyone immunocompromised? What are the camp's policies? Does the benefit of the social experience outweigh the potential risk? Maybe it does. There are also so many major life transitions that are on hold right now, and so many big accomplishments or big graduations and weddings that we can't celebrate, that are causing grief. And for many, these decisions are actually out of our control. The decision to have a graduation ceremony or not is, we don't make that decision. The school or the district is making that decision. Going back to work or what work opportunities are out there, again, we don't make that decision. It's out of our control. But we can use the same idea of risk allotment and what are the factors to help to understand why the school or the state or the employer have made the decisions that they have. We might not agree with the decisions that some other entity is making or the decisions that still affect us, but these are the factors that they're considering, and here's what they have decided the level of the risk is, and here's what might change that, and here's what I can do personally to deal with the reality of what is happening now. And back to school versus virtual school. It's not just about how safe school is, but how safe is it to go to school given the larger context of the household risk allotment and risk factors. So I mentioned major life transitions a few minutes ago in terms of understanding the decisions that others are making on our behalf that might be out of our control. But for many, big life transitions are happening in one way or another. Big transitions are really scary and worrisome for persons with autism and loved ones of persons with autism and anyone who does not have autism. It's terrifying to go through some major life transition. So I'm going to go over a little framework for preparing for big transitions that's valuable anytime, but particularly during a pandemic when we don't know what to expect, when the behavioral expectations of us might not be clear or might be subject to change, when anxiety and depression and hopelessness might be at an all-time high. So first, when dealing with a major life transition, explain why the change is occurring. It is so important to talk about the why, because we make meaning, humans make meaning out of what happens to us, rationally or irrationally. If we don't have the actual rational explanation for why this is changing or why we're going through this, we make up some meaning. We find a reason for it in our minds that often is irrational, that's often self-blaming, that's often really negative toward ourselves. So explaining the why is really important. This might be really easy for, say, a transition like graduating from high school. This is happening because you have finished all of your years of high school, and so now it's time to move on to the next phase. This is happening because of how old you are, because of all the amount of things that you've learned. You're done with this part. But if someone is moving to another state, which we all know has been really common during the pandemic, lots of people have moved, lots of people have moved further from cities. That's a lot harder to make meaning out of that. Why are my parents making me move? It must be because they don't like my best friend, who's the only person I have in my life. It must be because they don't care about me, because it's so hurtful for me. It's so scary for me to have to move, that they must not care about me. When the reality is, we're moving because of the opportunities that may be available in another state. But it's so important to explain the reasons to anyone when they're going through a big transition. Acknowledge the differences that it will bring. Yes, this change is going to make things different. Yes, here are all these things that are going to be different, and here's how we're going to deal with all those different things. At the same time, a lot of things are going to be the same. A lot of things are not going to be changing. A lot of things are going to be exactly what you know. And so let's find those as well. Make a plan for what needs to be done. When we go through a transition, it's requires a lot of preparation. It requires a lot of work. So make a plan early on for how are we going to prepare for it? How are we going to make it as easy and with as little stress as possible? And figure out who's doing what. Make sure your child is involved in planning and in preparing and taking the steps to make this transition happen. Even if it's something as simple as your job is to put all of your stuffed animals in this box, or here's what we need to do to make this move happen, or here's what we need to do to get you started with this internship, and here's this one thing that I need you to do right now, or here's this one thing that I need you to do first. This is your task. This is your job that you need to do. Highlight the positive aspects of the change. When we're going into a new phase of life, or anything that's brand new that we've never experienced before, it's impossible to even imagine all the good things that might come from it, because we don't know. We've never lived it before. We can't even imagine what it would be like. So spend a lot of time talking about the good things that you expect. Even if it's hard, these good things are going to come out of it. And then make a plan for seeking out resources for assistance. It's impossible to plan for everything. It's impossible to foresee all of the unexpected, or all of the uncertainties, all of the things that could go wrong. So instead of trying to plan in advance for the possible things that could go wrong, make a plan about who do you go to for help? If something unexpected happens and you don't know what to do, who do you know in this new job, or in this new school, or in this new place that you can go to for help? And if there is no one, then you find someone. Before any problem comes up, figure out who that person might be, bring in an advocate. Maybe you get more involved in your child's day-to-day, or whatever organization they're with, whatever employer or school they're with, and help that school or that employer set up some system so that your loved one with autism knows where to go should something come up that they can't handle. All right, let's talk about social anxiety, because it's a real problem right now and always. If you are a parent or caregiver or service provider to someone with autism, or if you are a person with autism, you know that autism often comes with really high levels of anxiety. The past year has been full of unexpected changes and uncertainty about what's coming next. And it's also been full of far fewer social related demands. So you may have noticed changes in your loved one's level of anxiety, and even your own level of anxiety. And for some kids with and without autism, online school has actually been a very welcome relief due to the removal of so many social demands. Anxiety is a survival mechanism, and humans are capable of experiencing anxiety for a reason. That reason is to act when faced with danger so that we can survive. The threats we experience in this day and age are often not actually life-threatening, although living through a pandemic certainly had some exceptions to that. But our survival response is evolutionarily very old and reacts the same way, whether we're studying for a test or preparing for a presentation or being attacked by a bear. We have a really intense, uncomfortable physical and emotional experience that spurs us into action to change it. From that uncomfortable experience, we may learn that the environment or set of circumstances during which we had that experience are not safe, led us to feel really uncomfortable, and should be avoided. And this is all natural. This is the way brains are supposed to work. The problem arises when this interferes with our ability to function and do the things we need to do. So when someone has social anxiety, They've had experiences in the social environment that were uncomfortable and possibly even truly threatening. Never underestimate the emotional toll of bullying or exclusion. But regardless, when social anxiety is present, the brain has learned, rationally or irrationally, that such environments and circumstances are unsafe, and the person then avoids the threat in the future, meaning the social situation. Avoidance provides temporary relief. So I may say I'm sick and don't go to the party, which reduces my anxiety that I was feeling about going to the party. This reduction in anxiety, I feel a little bit better, reinforces the avoidance behavior, making it more likely that I will avoid it again next time. But while the avoidance provides temporary relief, in the long term, it results in an ever increasing level of anxiety to that stimulus. I'm anxious again the next time there's a social event I'm expected to attend. To make things even more complicated, that brief relief that we experience through avoidance can lead to a fear of the feeling, meaning the anxious feeling is so uncomfortable that not only do we become afraid to experience the stimulus that produces anxiety, but we become afraid to experience the anxiety itself, making it much harder to push through the anxiety and do the task instead of avoiding it. But we need an alternative experience. We need to not avoid it in order to decrease the anxiety. And we can never have those alternative experiences if we always avoid them. And for so many of us, kids included, we've been living with a higher baseline of anxiety over the past year. So anxiety in general is up, and many kids have been able to avoid the stressful stimulus of a social environment of school for a very long time at this point. Avoidance has been the norm. Avoidance has been mandated. Avoidance has been necessary. So for a lot of kids, it's going to be really hard to go back to school, or already has been really hard being back to school. As parents, as caretakers, as teachers, we need to be prepared for that. So in the next section, I'm going to go over some coping tools that you might be able to incorporate. And I will suggest that you plan carefully and in advance to help your anxious child with this transition. On the one hand, increased anxiety about returning to school does not mean that they should not return to school. In fact, it means that they need to return to school in order to begin training a different response to the anxiety. On the other hand, if your child is not emotionally ready to handle returning to school, if they don't have enough coping tools, what are the other options? Maybe other social experiences with less people, fewer demand, can be stepping stones for your child to get out of that anxiety avoidance cycle with the long-term goal of returning to school. Or maybe not. For a lot of kids, virtual school was actually much better for them than face-to-face school. If your child is one of those and your school is continuing to offer that option, maybe you stick with that, but find other social opportunities outside of school. Whatever you do, be sure to share all of that information about your child's anxiety with teachers or other adults so that they can best support them and help them to ensure success in this alternative to the avoidance of dealing with anxiety. I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but this is a cartoon from the New Yorker that says, "I panicked when they said we could come out of our shells again," which seems very appropriate. All right, let's talk about coping emotionally and some tools that you might be able to incorporate or start teaching your kids to manage that anxiety that they might have going into this next phase of new normal. First of all, focus on what we can do and what we can control. Knowledge is power. We might not be able to do all the things that we want or exactly the way we want to do them, but there are so many things that we can do, and there are ways that we can do things that we want in a safer way. So focus on the yes instead of the no. For example, we can't go to the birthday party. Our risk allotment is too high. We can't go to the birthday party. But we can ask if so-and-so can have a play date just with you on a different day. Or you do have to wear your mask, but you get to go back to karate in person. So something you don't want to do allows you to do something you do want to do, something you've been missing or that you find joy in. For all those things that we can't control, which are great, there are lots of those. For all those things we can't control, though, we can't just turn off the worry. So helping kids to work on bringing their mind back to the present instead of focusing on all those things that they can't fix or can't control is a critical skill. This goes far beyond the pandemic. Life in general is full of disappointment, full of uncertainty, full of worry. So if we can help our kids learn to bring their minds back to the present instead of worrying about all those things that are beyond our control, it can do a lot to decrease their baseline level of anxiety overall, not just because of the pandemic. So talk about the temporary nature of life right now. This is our life for now. This is the plan for now. This is what we're able to do for now. It's not going to be that way forever. And for now, this is what we can do. One day this will change too. For those cases where a child might be really worried about something that might come later, or things that they can't do anything about, they're helpless. Ask them to notice, what do I know for sure right now? I know that I am safe right now at this very moment. I am safe. My family is safe. I know that I'm okay. Life right now, at this moment, is what I know it to be. Maybe it's going to change again in a few weeks, but for right now, at this moment, I know what to expect and I know what to do and I know that I'm okay. If someone's worried about something bad that might happen down the road, like somebody's worried about their family's moving and they know that they're going to move and that feels terrifying, we can't do anything about what's going to happen in 3 weeks from now. In 3 weeks from now, when that's happening, we will be able to take action. It's the helplessness that's so scary. So in 3 weeks, we won't be helpless anymore. In 3 weeks, we'll be able to do something about it. But right now, we can't change it. So let's bring your mind back to right now, where it's safe and okay, and you know what to do, and you know what to expect. Using the 5 senses is a great way to bring awareness back to the present. Sensory experiences are present experiences. You can't have a sensory experience when the sensory stimulus is not present. So simply asking the person to notice what they're seeing or hearing or smelling right now is really grounding. In fact, it's the definition of grounding, is bringing yourself to what's happening right now. You can also do an activity called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you ask your child to notice 5 things that they see that are fill in the blank. Circle, yellow, smooth, rough. Look around the room and tell me 5 things you see that are yellow. And then notice 4 things that you can feel on your body. I can feel my legs and my butt in my chair. I can feel my sweater on my skin. And then notice 3 things that you can hear right now. If someone says, I can hear the phone when it rings, but the phone isn't ringing, that's not right now. That's not a sensory experience that they're having right now. But they can hear maybe the sound of my voice. They can hear the air conditioner running. Notice 2 things that you can smell. You might have to provide 2 things that they can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And if they're not eating or there's nothing of note that they can taste, just notice what the inside of their mouth is like, or notice what it tastes like inside their mouth. You can also cut out the smell and taste steps of this and just do 3, 2, 1 instead. 3 things you see, 2 things you feel, 1 thing you can hear. And some things stay the same, even when everything seems to be different, when everything is uncertain and nothing is as I know it. Some things stay the same. Those might be pandemic related things like having to wear a mask, who knows? But it can also be comfort related things like you'll still get to watch your iPad every night, or mom is still going to make you breakfast every morning, or even something really small like the radio station in the car can be a constant that you can point to as something familiar and known. Whenever possible, try to use visuals to increase understanding and make ideas more concrete. Visuals also offer something that kids can go back to as needed. Acknowledge that this is hard. Change is always hard. Going back into social interaction or starting a brand new routine might be really challenging. So acknowledge that. Say that out loud. Doing so gives kids the message that they are seen and heard and that their experience matters. And these two factors are so critical in a child's development of themselves. If you are going to use some of those techniques that I just talked about, like the using the 5 senses or the mindfulness experiences, right now at this moment, you're okay and you know what's going to happen. Before asking your child to do that, always start with, I see that this is hard. I see that you are so scared. They need to know that they're heard before you try to engage them in decreasing their anxiety or decreasing their distress or discomfort, so that they know that you get it. You're not just trying to make that go away or stop their repetitive questions. They need to know that you get it, you hear them. Acknowledging feelings is so important for big kids and adults too. This is hard for everyone. Older teens and adults are dealing with major life transitions during a pandemic, during periods of uncertainty and unknowns. There is grief, there is fear. We need to take the time to recognize and validate those feelings rather than simply trying to jump into problem solving or say, yeah, I know you're scared, but here's what we're going to do about it. We need to acknowledge and allow ourselves to feel those feelings. A word about grief. Grief is a normal human process. It's the reason why we feel sadness, and life transitions are always a time of grieving. There's always a loss during a transition. For some people, maybe it's a loss in a good way, leaving a toxic job, or if you've hated high school, you're excited to be out of high school, but it's still a loss. And going through that during a pandemic just adds a huge layer. We might also be experiencing more transition than usual, given job losses and other major life changes that go with events like a job loss. And grieving is a process. It takes time. So remember that all of the difficulties of COVID are in some way related to grief, and deal with them as such, with time, with recognition of those feelings, with sharing memories, with rituals. And remember connection. Human connection is one of the safest ways, one of the ways that we find safety. Kids and even adults are always looking for a safe home base, a person they can go to who they know will be calm, and they know will be able to help them feel calm and regulated. Your connection with your child or your loved ones is the best way to help them manage their fears and intense feelings. When all else fails, remember that you are home base and find a way to connect. Join with them emotionally, join with them physically, engage in some activity together. You are the key to your child's regulation. The most primitive ways that humans calm and regulate their nervous system are body-based movements or sensory experiences that send a message to the brain that we're safe. When a child is in meltdown mode or completely overwhelmed, these are your only options to help a child find the calm. The cognitive part of the brain is turned off when they're in that state. You might also have kids who are not really capable of the more cognitive mindfulness-based strategies. So learn what types of body-based strategies are helpful for your child and offer them when needed or simply throughout the day to decrease normal everyday nervous system activation. Things like massages, hugs, calming scents. A lot of people with autism have stimming behaviors, and we're now learning more and more that stimming behaviors are sources of regulation. Of course, simply decreasing external stimulation and decreasing what is coming into the body or what is coming in through the senses might help as well. Some kids really need alone time as a way to re-regulate, but for others, alone time is terrifying. For others, they really need connection with another person to bring them back down. So explore a lot of these options, see what works for your child, and know what works, know what types of sensory or movement or tactile kind of experiences they like, so that when they're in a really difficult state, when they're having a meltdown or they're really dysregulated, you have these at your disposal and you know what to do that helps. You're not trying to figure it out when they've already gotten to that point. Okay, that's all the information I had, but I want to mention that I am starting a study here in Austin, Texas. I know a lot of you are not in the Austin area, and so this unfortunately might not be an option for you, but I am doing a research study for adults with autism 18 and older, in-person therapy visits that will provide EMDR therapy for past trauma or difficult experiences to demonstrate whether or not EMDR therapy is an effective trauma treatment for people with autism. There is some information there on the slide. It's also on the ARI website if you're interested in more information. I'm happy to take some questions. Denise, you know what we have.
Yeah, and so people who are here, you can type questions into the question section if you want to now. I've got a stack here that I'll start with. One of the first questions was about, it's from a single parent who's asking about strategies for getting a child who's now 100 pounds because they're, I'm guessing, a tween or a teen. How do you get them out of the house if they've been afraid all this time? What are some practical strategies that you might use? You can't just pick them up and put them in the car seat anymore. So what are some positive strategies that you've seen people use to try to persuade loved ones to get a little more comfortable stepping out?
Right. So I'll give some ideas with the, you know, the keep in mind what is safe and allowed and what options are available in your community or for your household. But I would try, if possible, to start by trying to get him out of the house for preferred activities, for things that they like to do. So if they like to go to Target, when it's safe to go to Target, you're only going to be trying to get him out of the house to go to Target, go to the places he likes to go. And that activity is reinforcing. He maybe is willing to leave to do that reinforcing activity. When it comes to less preferred activities or things that he has to do but is unwilling, you can offer reinforcement or incentives for doing so if possible, if that's effective. And if not, I always recommend, if, again, depending on this person's capabilities and what the options are, I always suggest collaborative problem solving. So if your child needs to go to a doctor appointment and refuses to go, you say, here's what I need. I hear that you are afraid, or it's not fun to go to the doctor, or it's you would rather be home doing what you like to do. How can we work together to find a solution? Maybe I need to compromise in some way, and that will help the child compromise in some way. So working together, what would make this okay? I see that you're really scared. What would make this more okay? What would make this more comfortable for you? Get the child's input and what they're willing to do, as well as what you can do to help them. Maybe there's no way to avoid going to the doctor, but maybe you can watch your iPad while you're at the doctor's office. Maybe you can watch your iPad instead of having to, and I'll do all the talking to the doctor. How can we make this okay? What would make it a little bit more comfortable so that we can make it happen? We can make both of our goals happen.
That's great. That's really great advice. Thank you. This next question is about just looking for resources about helping. This sounds like about a kindergarten or first grade age child who's trying to understand emotions. So if there are any go-to books you've ever found or resources you'd suggest for helping to explain that for kids.
Oh, good question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. You could always email me some resources after.
Is that an option?
Yes.
Can I email you some resources that you can distribute to everyone?
Yes, I'll put it on the playback page. Yep.
Okay. What I can say is, and I'll see if I can find some sort of a visual or something that that we can distribute to everyone. But I talk about emotions as messengers, that every emotion that we have is there to tell us something, to bring us a message. And so first of all, an emotion comes knocking. And so it's important that we allow ourselves to acknowledge it and feel it rather than just go, nope, I'm not going to answer right now. Otherwise, it comes right back and knocks again. Or it comes back even bigger and says, I'm still here, and knocks even harder. And those messages are things like if someone is feeling angry, it's because they need to protect themselves in some way. Or someone has violated a boundary and we need to protect ourselves. And maybe it might be kind of a helpless feeling if we can't do anything about it, but maybe it's not helpless. Maybe there is something we can do about it. If we're feeling happy, it means that we're safe and that everything's okay and that it's safe to relax right now. I can let my guard down and it's safe. So every emotion that we have brings us a message. It tells us about what's happening around us. It tells us about what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And we have to listen to those, or they aren't going to go, they come right back if we don't listen to them. But I'll see what books or videos or stuff like that is out there that might be helpful.
Great. And same for adults.
And for adults?
Yep, they were asking about adults as well. Sorry about that. I got some feedback on my end. Yeah. So if there's,
I actually use the very same description for adults.
Oh,
with or without autism, the emotions as messengers is the same.
Right. Well, great. So people were asking about the same. So it sounds like we've covered that part. But any books that you have as well would be great. And I'll be sure to share those on the playback page once we post the video. So this person is asking about their loved one has actually preferred remote learning. And so in the fall, they'll be returning to regular school, and they're wondering about preparing for that transition and helping their student understand that remote learning is not going to be an option anymore and walking them through that. So I don't know if you'd have a specific strategy, and I'm sure a lot of what you've already talked about applies, but is there anything really specifically related to that you can talk about, since school really isn't optional? It's sort of a mandatory thing. We can't go to Target instead. We've got to right. So what's some language that might be helpful in that case?
So I would start talking about it now, start preparing them for the fact that in the fall there is no virtual school anymore, so you're going to have to go back to school. What can we do to make that okay? how can we make school less scary for you? How can we make school a little bit better for you? And see what the child has to say. If possible, ask them what are the specific fears or concerns that they might have. There are probably some real legitimate fears, some real things that are hard about school, and there are also probably a whole lot of irrational fears. A lot of what if this happens, what if that happens? The possibilities are so scary. So make a list of exactly what the child can identify as scary, and then problem solve. Even if it's something that is so outrageous, like, you know, I'm afraid that I'm gonna miss the school bus, and then I'm gonna have to walk to school, and I'm gonna get lost on the way to school, and then I'm never gonna see you again. It's completely irrational, but that for the child is real. That's the real, that really is a fear. And what if that happens? Okay, let's say that happens. Let's say you miss the school bus and you have to walk to school. Well, first of all, if you miss the school bus, would you walk to school? Let's make a plan in case you miss the school bus. If you miss the school bus, you're going to call mom and dad and we'll help you. But let's say you can't get a hold of mom and dad until you have to walk. Do you know how to get to school? Yes. Okay, so this is the route that you would follow. And what if there was a detour and the road was closed and then you got lost? Do you carry your cell phone with you? Yes. Do you know how to use your GPS? Yes. If no cell phone, okay. If you had to go into a store and ask for help, let's practice asking for help. So all of those, even the most irrational fears, create a plan, problem solve as if it really could happen. Know that fear is, having a plan will help, but the fear is still real. The fear is still there. So acknowledge it and say, I know that school is still really scary. Even though we know what to expect and we have a plan, I know that it's still scary. So use some of those anxiety management techniques. Focus on right now. Right now it's okay. When you're at school, focus on 1 minute at one moment at a time. And just acknowledging that the fear is real and what would make it better for you? What would make this more okay? And their answer is going to be to not have to go to school. Okay,
Right.
I hear that. What else? What else would make it okay? Since virtual school isn't an option, how are we going to make going to school okay for you?
Okay, this next thing, this person's just sharing a strategy that she's used.
Okay.
She's talking about creative coping strategies. So she has a personal example she wanted to share. So this past year, she made a story bead wire, and it has her name on it, and it's kind of like a timeline necklace. So each bead represents something different, and she gets to decide what goes on it. She puts things on there for memorable events, good or special days, important people, appointments, challenges, connections, transitions, feelings that she's recognized. So she's talking a little about her feelings here that are wonderful, or perseverance, hope, friendship, or gratitude. She said it shows a lot of good challenges overcome, and it's decreased her anxiety. So it's like a reward for her that she gets to wear around as a way to communicate with herself about her feelings. So I think it was great that she shared that. She said her name's Kitteren Jester. She's here in our question and answer section. And she said it's really important to her to have that so that she can hold her beads and think about the year as a whole and communicate about what's important in her story.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's a great story. And so, and she invited other people if they wanted to share some of their creative strategies. But that's a great visual way to sort of track things, and it's almost like going to camp and having your bead necklace, and but it's a little more sophisticated as we become adults. So yeah, really a neat idea. So you talked a lot about, you've addressed these problems from a bunch of different angles, so I don't want to get too redundant, but one parent was talking about feelings and anxiety with nonverbal individuals. So if you're working with a loved one who's using a different type of communication, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any just sort of initial thoughts about ways to try to detect anxiety and stress that might be specific to the pandemic with kids who are experiencing that?
I would suggest using visuals as much as possible. The experience of emotion is really abstract, so whatever we can do to make that more concrete is always, you know, a good option. So if we have like it might be something like a thermometer again that tells us, you know, 0 is feeling good and 10 is out of control. It might be like a spectrum of how I feel, going from happy to sad or happy to angry. And then for many people, verbal or nonverbal, we have to teach emotional awareness. We have to teach what this feels like, and here's what I do about it, autism or not. So these strategies are good even for someone who is verbal, but if you can have some visuals to refer back to, when the person is feeling something in the moment, point to what's happening visually. It's also much easier to understand when we're in a crisis state. We can see things visually better than we can process sound or language. So be able to point to something visually to say, this is what you're feeling, or can you point to what you're feeling, or on a scale, how big is it? How big does this feel? How bad does this feel? And then have visuals of strategies, have visuals of here's what I can do about it, or visuals of asking for this. I need a massage right now. I need a hug. I need a really big hug right now. Yeah, and I will see if I can send some resources related to that as well.
Yeah, I definitely put you on the spot about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, related to that too, you're talking about identifying feelings. And I'd imagine if someone's going through a big transition, like to a new school, if they're transitioning between different big life transitions, using visuals for that would be helpful as well. So
right.
Getting pictures from websites or finding pictures of the teachers or whatever they can do to visually help prepare that loved one, whether they're verbal or not, to have a picture of what's coming.
Yes, yes. As much as you can do as far as helping them understand problem solving is great, but remember that emotions are not rational. So even if they have all the information and have a plan in place, it might still be really scary. So that's normal. If that is the case, if you've done everything you can to plan for it and they're still terrified, that's normal. That's how emotions work.
So not a failure as a parent.
Exactly.
Right. Doing the best we can.
Yes.
All right. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for doing this today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I hope some of this information is helpful, and I will send you some resources that you can put on the page.
That'd be great. And I will send that link out to everybody. It'll be resent tomorrow, but it's also in the reminder email today. So for everyone who's still here, we should have the quiz up and running in 5 to 10 minutes. So you'll want to go and take that. Again, the link was in your reminder email, so you can check that out in a little bit. If you are going to be looking for a webinar next week, we are doing a talk on transcranial magnetic stimulation. So that's TMS, which is a therapy that has been used for some individuals for different anxiety and autism related disorders. Registration is free and it's on our webpage at autismwebinars.org. So be sure to sign up and check out our other future talks. And Amanda, we'll look forward to seeing you back soon.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.